Hi all, I have a genuinely remarkable game to show you from the Paris Blitz portion. So this is Magnus Carlsen against Wesley So. Grand Chess Tour Paris Blitz, 25th of June 2017. D4 for Magnus. We see knight f6, bishop f4. This is already an unusual move. Of course it could be used to construct a London system setup. We see after d5, e3, which is a move I like on the first move at the moment. So you could say it's like a French defense with the bishop outside the pawn chain. c5, but now a very, very interesting move, knight c3, and there's an immediate threat with it actually, knight b5, which might be difficult to parry. And in Livebook, the most usual way to handle this position is to play either c takes d4, which seems to release the tension, or e6. I'll give you an example. C takes d4, e takes, and now a6 to stop knight b5. Here you see that black seems to have kind of violated what a lot of experienced players might be at least cynical about, releasing the central tension, but black should be okay here technically. There isn't too much to worry about, even though there's no tension on white center. It should be okay. And the other approach is to play e6. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't believe knight b5 does too much in this position. If we look at knight b5, knight a6, yeah, it's plausible. Nothing else but knight a6. But although it's like one of the only moves, it does the job here, and black can get on. Yeah, I just needed to check this position. There's no other way. This is too dangerous. This is going to be a total disaster, this position for black. So okay, but Wesley, okay, he plays a6 to stop knight b5. This isn't as good as CD, and perhaps this game serves as a good example, because white now takes on c5, and the positional threat is a3 and b4. Sometimes a response to taking on c5 is to play for e5, but white controls e5 quite well here. Black plays e6. If he plays black plays e6. If he plays knight c6, let's say a3, e5, bishop g5. Now the d5 pawn is really loose. This position can only favour white, so it's interesting. This is really interesting territory. So e6 is played, and now Magnus plays knight a4, and it looks like a clinging on move, which looks a bit awkward. Knight on the rim is dim and all that, but here black has already compromised his dark squares, and you might not think that's a big deal tactically. How can weak dark squares be a big deal tactically? And I want you to remember that question throughout the remainder of this game. There is a close relationship, an intimate, profound relationship between weakened squares and loose pieces on those weakened squares later. As a simple example, so let's see, bishop takes c5. Although black's getting his pawn back tactically with this little trick, you can see that it's white that has the dark square bishop. It's black that has pawns on light squares here without the dark square bishop. So is black fundamentally prone to loose pieces on dark squares? That's a key question here. Very interesting game example. Knight f3, knight c6. This is on a light square, this piece, so no problem yet. You might think bishop d3. We have the move h6, which seems a bit strange, maybe a bit overly cautious. It seems as though castling was fine. So we have h6. Now knight e5, and white can potentially use this knight takes c6 at the right moment as an interesting forcing move. Bear that one in mind. Both sides castle, and it's here after queen e7 that in fact this idea of using the forcing move is leveraged with a very, very clever move, c4. And you might wonder, how on earth is this leveraged, this knight takes c6 here? And I'll show you. Black didn't play this, but if he did, bang, knight takes c6, And can you guess what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, white's play. Bishop d6, skewing queen and rook, and if takes, we pick up the queen with the check. So it's already, this is a very interesting move, fully leveraging the possibility of knight takes and bishop d6. On dark squares, note, these tactics are on dark squares. White is strong on the dark squares. We have knight takes e5, bishop takes, d takes, bishop takes c4, and white is now threatening again, bishop d6, skewering the queen and rook. Rook d8, queen f3. This bishop is a real problem piece in this position. If bishop d7, white can freely just take on b7. He's controlling b8, so there's no counterplay there with rook b8. That's just a pawn. That's just winning a pawn for nothing. We see that the shielding of the b7 pawn. The knight is kicked to a dark square now. Now look at this. There are 3 pieces here on dark squares and 2 on light squares. Now what did I mention earlier? Black was already weakened on dark squares. We have now the move bishop b3, and this is a very, very difficult position for black. Black now plays f6. Let's just take a moment in this position to consider bishop d7 as well. On bishop d7, yeah, dark squares, good for tactics. Queen g3 threatens mate, and also bishop c7 is supported as well potentially. This looks very nasty. Yep. And in fact, you might think, well, even bishop c7 immediately is good. This is also good because there's an interruption of c7 anyway. Yeah. But even queen g3 first might even be an improvement. Kick the queen to f8 and then play bishop c7. You can see the tactical disasters on dark squares emerging here. You know, just the routine move bishop d7. So we have f6 here. Bishop c3, and this introduces bishop a5 now as a potential skewer. So black is irritated by his dark square vulnerability here and plays a5. And there might be now a threat of a4, which could be very useful for black to kick the bishop off, unpinning the pawn, and then e5 to shut down this bishop. So if black gets his way, a4 and then e5. If he had played something else, you know, rook d7, then either queen e3 or bishop a5 here. And this is really difficult, or both, because actually the knight is a bit stranded. If queen e3 here, knight d7 escaping, but bishop b4. You can see the tactics on the dark squares, that they are springing up like weeds here in this undergrowth of dark squares, basically. So yeah, you know, okay, after a5, a3 so to answer a4 to keep the pin with bishop a2 on the pawn, which keeps the bishop hemmed in, and that pawn is better there because this has got a fine view of this diagonal at the moment. But a4 wasn't played. We have king h8, unpinning like that. But now queen e3. Where is the knight going? Perhaps the best move is to play knight d7 and allow this uncomfortable position, swap one uncomfortable position for another, and maybe a move like b6 or b5. This position to have to bear is unpleasant. It might not be completely lost just yet, but it's extremely unpleasant position. If you look at this, white is dominating here. This is a clear advantage for white. So anyway, we have the awkward looking rook a6, which is worse actually. After rook ad1, white is content to exchange off one of black's better, more centrally relevant pieces. We have e5. Maybe again, we have e5. Maybe better was rook takes d1, but this is a really even worse uncomfortable position than we've seen before. Look at this. I mean, this is just horrible, this kind of position. In fact, it might just be totally losing. This position is looking completely terrible for black. So anyway, e5. But now, a nice shot from Magnus, which shows the dark square disaster of the opening, basically. This echoes back to the dark squares again. Can you see if I give you 5 seconds? White to play here. What would you play with white? Okay, bishop takes a5, yeah. b6 is vulnerable. Rook takes d1, that's one of black's best pieces going. And now, the unfortunate thing, black can't really recapture here. If he recaptures here, queen takes b6, and we've got queen d8 on the cards. It doesn't matter what happens here. You know, if rook a6, we just play queen e8, and we're going to be winning the bishop after. If the rook goes back, then there's going to be a nasty pin anyway. You know, for example, like this looks convincing enough with that nasty pin. So yeah, it's a really unfortunate position here. So we have actually, okay, bishop e6 being played. Now just bishop takes b6, and black's losing a piece. Magnus has made this game look really easy. Yeah, the undercurrent was the weaknesses on the dark squares for a very, very unusual opening sequence. This must be considered a very, very interesting blitz surprise weapon, this whole opening sequence. A fascinating game, I find, from the perspective of loose pieces on dark squares. The seeds set right from the opening of this game. Very, very interesting territory to explore, especially if you're a keen blitz player like me, of course. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.